My mother, Alice Brennan, was a remarkable individual. She was spontaneous, she was flamboyant, she was funny. I often kid and say, my mother would make Lucille Ball look dull. She was just, the life of the party. She was a fiercely independent 88-year-old woman who lived in her own home, drove her own vehicle, had a active social life that would exhaust most 20-year-olds. She could nail all the activities of daily living. As I mentioned, lived in her own home, drove her own vehicle, managed her own medications, and there were only a few. She was really, when she was at home, she was only on 3 medications. She managed her own financial affairs down to the penny, and was really just someone who loved life. So that she was a friend to so many. She was a devoted grandmother. She attended every single one of my kids' sporting events and plays and concerts. She was remarkable. Tragically, Mom trusted her health care to 2 healthcare systems. She went to a community hospital 1/3 of July, and she had, as I mentioned, she was very social, and she had many activities planned for the 4th of July weekend. And she woke up with this nagging pain in her neck, in her back, and her shoulders. And she thought, I am never going to be able to get to these picnics and parties feeling like this. So she drove herself to a community emergency department and went in and said, give me something for this. The emergency department physician prescribed a medication for her that she had never taken before. And it was a muscle relaxant called Flexeril, a cyclobenzaprine, to be technical. And she left the emergency department and drove to her community pharmacy, had the script filled, went home, and by the time she got home, she had been up and moving around, felt better after that, never took the medication. Put it in her medicine cabinet, and really, frankly, forgot about it. A few days later, on or about the 6th of July, I went with her to an appointment with her neurologist. Mom had had a mini stroke or a TIA a few years prior, and just for a checkup. There was nothing going on, just to make sure everything was good, and to she would take her medications that she was taking at home with her. And this time, in addition to the blood thinner and the medication for her hypertension and an eye drop that she was taking, in addition to that was this Flexeril that was on the list. And the neurologist looked at the 2 of us and said, oh, dear God, who would give an 88-year-old woman Flexeril? So I have no medical background. My mother had no medical background. We just trusted that the medication that she was provided was safe. And so we, expressed concern about why he said that, and he gave us this crash course in something called the Beers criteria, medication lists that are very dangerous for seniors. And of course, Flexeril was on that list. So he said to Mom and said to me, go home, dispose of that medication, do not take that again. Never take that again. Don't get it refilled. It could be very dangerous for you, Mrs. Brennan. Okay, that's all you need to tell us. It's all you need to tell us. So off we went home. She had never taken even one of them, so we disposed of the medication, not realizing that there's such a thing as medication reconciliation. And that's something that I would never have in a million years at that time had any idea of what that was. What that is the ability of hospitals to see what medication you're on, and it's, electronic, and it tracks what medications you're on. It should not be used as an inventory system. It should be used to be able to determine, what medications are appropriate and if they're safe for you to be taking, again, not just as an inventory system. So, a couple of days after the appointment with the neurologist, Mom drove up to my house and got out of her car, kind of limping a bit, and said, "Oh, I am just falling apart. Now my knee is swollen and stiff, and I can hardly get my jeans up over it. And I've got this 70th reunion that I want to be, I'm on the steering committee, for goodness sake. I need to be at that high school reunion. I want to be dancing, and now what am I going to do?" So off we went to her primary care physician, whom she'd had for about 16 years. And he, examined her and said, "Alice, it looks like gout to me, but we wouldn't know until tests were done, so I'm going to refer you to an orthopedic specialist." Off we go to the orthopedic specialist, who said, "Well, Mrs. Brennan, I think your primary care physician is accurate, but I think we need to have you admitted to the local hospital to run some tests." So, off she goes to the hospital and is admitted, and tests are done, and the diagnosis is pseudo-gout. It comes back. They treat her, accordingly, and then she was under the care of a hospitalist at this hospital. And he left word for me with a charge nurse on the floor, saying that his recommendation would be for Mom to go into a rehab facility for a week or 10 days to just make sure that she was safe to be living home alone in her 2-story home. Okay, she was willing to do it, doesn't want to do it, but off she goes to the rehab facility. And, true to her really engaging social self, she was the life of the party. She's running the bingos and going table to table in the dining room, and kind of like the Walmart greeter, and really approached her physical therapy with gusto. So she was there for a week to 10 days, as it was approaching sort of that 10-day mark, my husband and youngest son and I met with the discharge planner at the rehab facility and to talk about her discharge. And it didn't occur to me until sometime much later that Mom was not even, in her own discharge planning meeting. Nothing about me without me should be your mantra. Nothing about me without me. The very next day, after the discharge planning meeting, Mom was out by the nurses' station. I mean, I can still see this vividly in my head. Out by the nurses' station, hunched over in a wheelchair, gray, lethargic, nauseated. But most alarmingly, she was experiencing the most just terrifying hallucinations. And I had never seen anyone in the throes of hallucinations. I mean, maybe on television or maybe in some movie, but not my mother, not somebody who had been admitted to a community hospital for routine treatment of gout, and now is in the throes of, like a psychotic episode, where she thought that my life was in danger, her life was in danger. She was seeing things coming through windows at her. And I turned to the nurse and said, "What happened to my mother? I mean, what could possibly have happened that she is now in this kind of state?" And the nurse said, I don't know. I don't know. I said, "Well, did she get somebody else's medication? Did she, did you give her, a double dose of something? I mean, what could cause something like this?" And she got Mom's chart out, and this was the first time that I saw what medications she was on. And what medication do you think might have been on that list? If you're thinking maybe that Flexeril that she had been given in the emergency department, you'd be right. So that's where the medication reconciliation went horribly awry. So here is Mom, who was advised by her neurologist never to take this medication, had been given this medication 3 times a day for nearly 3 weeks. And that's just, that was the sentinel event, that prescribing of that medication early on tracked her all the way through, not only the community hospital, but the rehab facility. If we had looked at a medication list upon her initial admission to the hospital, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. If we had seen that Flexeril was the medication that was going to be given to her, we would have said, no, stop, this is dangerous. But we didn't look at that medication list, not at the hospital and not at the rehab facility until it was too late. So I explained to the nurse what we had been told by the neurologist, and she checked with the attending physician at the rehab facility, and they agreed to take her off of the Flexeril. And she said, well, within 24 to 48 hours, she should be good as new if we stop it now. Well, I'm here to tell you that the half-life of Flexeril is not 24 to 48 hours. She never recovered from it. And it just continued to spiral. She was hallucinating, and in addition to all of the other adverse, effects of that medication on somebody my mother's age, in addition to the nausea and the unsteady gait and the hallucinations, there was also urinary retention. There was also, just again, this depleted, she was exhausted and she had no appetite. So all of those things combined to really take a tremendous toll on her. She developed profound dehydration, which required her to be sent back to the community hospital for treatment. And it was at that point that she was discovered to have the first of the multiple healthcare acquired infections that she developed. The first one was MRSA. So she was being treated for MRSA and dehydration, then was sent back to the rehab facility, still so profoundly disoriented and hallucinating with an unsteady gait that upon arrival at the rehab facility, she fell. And she injured her back and her hand, sent her back for the final time. And I can remember it was a Sunday night, and we were in the dining room, and here she is with MRSA and dehydrated, and I'm trying to get her to drink or to eat. And she just said, I can't. I'm so sick. But I have such bad back and belly pain too. So I asked the nurse, could it be a UTI maybe? And I was hoping, because I know sometimes with UTIs, there can be some cognitive impairment as a result, some confusion. And I was hoping that this would be perhaps something that could be treated and I could get my mother back in, a semblance of the person that she was when she was initially admitted. And the first test came back negative, but then as things continued to deteriorate, they took another test and it came back positive. So she was sent back to the hospital for the final time. And her walking around weight at that point was about 132 pounds when she was sent back at that time for treatment of the UTI and MRSA. And but she was still she was hallucinating so badly during this time. I was asked by the charge nurse, and at this point I still had not laid eyes on the hospitalist this entire time. It had been a month. from the time of the initial hospitalization. I was advised by the charge nurse that the hospitalist in Mom's care did not really believe that she was indeed an appropriate patient for the hospital, and instead he wanted to have her discharged to a psychiatric facility, which was, I was just livid and thought, she's in the state that she's in right now because of improper medication error. And, I'll be darned if she's going to be discharged to a psychiatric facility when she has MRSA and a UTI and in the throes of hallucinations. So instead, what happened to Mom was that she was pumped full of antipsychotics. And remember, I mentioned that when she was home, she was on 3 medications. At this point in the hospitalization, she was on 26 medications, 26 medications. And it was outrageous. And they were making her terribly, terribly sick, terribly, terribly confused, not touching the hallucinations. And almost all of them were on that list of medications that are dangerous for an elderly person. So I reached out to have a geriatric specialist be brought in to meet with Mom, to really analyze her care and make a recommendation of what could be done to potentially to turn this around. And he, again, met with her, he examined her, he did a cognitive exam, and he looked at her chart, and he met with me after, and he said, Mary, your mother is, she's not delusional, but she is suffering from about the worst case of polypharmacy I think I have ever seen. So polypharmacy is, multiple medications, many of which are going to be having a negative effect on your health. And Mom, as I mentioned, was on 26 of them. So this particular geriatric specialist said, Mary, if your mother is going to survive this, she has to be removed from all of these medications and brought back to just the ones that she was on at home. And I thought, okay, finally we have a game plan now. We have a game plan. And the very next day, here I was, riding high thinking that we had something that would be able to turn this around. And I got a call again from the charge nurse saying that the hospitalist wanted me to come in and sign a DNR, a do not resuscitate order. And I thought, well, why would I do that? We finally now have something that is going to be able to improve her health and hopefully get her back to at least, a shell of the person that she had been. And she said, well, now your mother has C. difficile. So now Mom has a life-threatening healthcare-acquired infection, 2 of them, MRSA, C. difficile, and a UTI. And her weight now had dropped from 132 pounds to 108 pounds in 10 days. So she was, she dropped 24 pounds in 10 days. I called this geriatric specialist back and said, okay, now what do we do? And he said, Mary, if Alice was my mother, I would call in hospice. And I'll tell you what, I think the world of hospice. Hospice is an amazing organization that provides end-of-life care. What I did not want was end-of-life care for my mother. I wanted her to go to her 70th high school reunion. I wanted her to be able to drive her, favorite little car. I wanted her to go out to lunch with her friends. I did not want her to be languishing in a hospital bed because of medication error and a lack of attention to infection control. But I did call hospice. And they came in and they evaluated Mom and said, yes, she is appropriate for hospice. I would have been the happiest woman alive if she failed the hospice test. But sadly, she did not. And she was admitted. And upon admission, in addition to MRSA, C. difficile, and the UTI, she also had another deadly healthcare-acquired infection called VRE. And when you put all those initials together, that spells sepsis. And it killed her. Mom died 6 weeks after she was admitted for garden variety gout. And that's what happened to Alice Brennan. If I were to turn the clock back, I would have looked at the medication list that Mom was given in the hospital. If that had happened, if we had been able to see that Flexeril was on the list of medications she was going to be given, we would have been able to stop it at that point. I wish that there were non-pharmaceutical answers to certain treatments. I wish that when Mom had gone to the emergency department, that instead of prescribing a medication, that instead perhaps physical therapy would have been recommended. Perhaps just saying go home and put a warm compress on your neck or your shoulders would have been a more appropriate answer.